What if the most decisive weapon in modern warfare was not a missile, nor a drone, nor even a battalion of tanks, but an ordinary stretch of asphalt, an unremarkable highway running through the heart of a forgotten landscape? Imagine for a moment that the real fulcrum of victory rests not in the destructive power of explosives, but in the subtle art of strangulation, choking the enemy's ability to fight, to move, to hope, simply by denying them a single road. This is not just theory. In the autumn of 2025, as the world's attention flickered from crisis to crisis, the fate of thousands came to hinge on just such a road. The highway from Pokrovsk to Konstantinovka, a mere vein across the Donbas, became the axis upon which a colossal campaign would turn. At first glance, it was an unremarkable strip of gray, winding through the endless steppe of eastern Ukraine. Yet it was no mere thread of pavement lost among the wheat fields and ruined villages. It was the only artery sustaining two embattled cities, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. Every bullet, every ration, every desperate reinforcement crossed this narrow route, day and night, in an endless procession of trucks and armored vehicles. Take this road away, and the entire force would be stranded, isolated, exposed, and ultimately doomed. Russian commanders recognized the stakes in an instant. They understood that cutting this road would not simply slow the enemy for a handful of days. It could trigger a domino effect, collapsing the entire northern Donetsk defense in record time. Sever the artery, and the heart of resistance would falter. The clock was ticking, every hour bringing new risk and new opportunity. Everything hung in the balance. Failure would mean the enemy could regroup, their front would become unbreakable, and hope would be restored to their defenders. But seize this slender opportunity, and one audacious stroke could decide the fate of the whole campaign, and perhaps redraw the map of the war itself. How did this highway, so inconspicuous on any map, become the linchpin of a historic operation? And what did it take, not just in firepower, but in calculation, deception, and nerve, to wrench control of it from the enemy's grasp? To unravel this, we must rewind the clock and trace how a single road reshaped the very art of modern war. To understand why this road mattered so much, we must first examine how logistics shape battlefields. In every war, from the age of Alexander the Great to the present day, the fate of armies has often hinged less on the courage of soldiers than on the steady flow of supplies. The story of Operation Anaconda, as this campaign would become known, began long before the first shot was fired. Why did the fate of tens of thousands rest on one narrow stretch of highway? The answer was blunt, even brutal. This single corridor was the only lifeline sustaining the enemy's entire force across northern Donbas. Every day and night, an unbroken stream of vehicles carried ammunition, fuel, food, and tens of thousands of troops along this thread of asphalt. Its destruction would not merely cause inconvenience, it would paralyze all resistance in the region. Intelligence revealed that as much as 70% of all supplies, fuel, weapons, rations, medical kits, traveled this one route. It was the artery feeding the enemy's will to fight. Past attempts to shell the road disrupted traffic for only a few hours. Craters were patched, wrecks cleared, and convoys resumed before dusk. The enemy's tenacity and deep reserves meant that harassment fire was never enough to stop the flow. To truly choke off the enemy, something more decisive was needed. Not just harassing the road, but severing it outright, taking and holding the entire corridor. This was the core of Operation Anaconda. The objective was not to storm heavily fortified cities head-on, paying in blood for every block, but to surround and starve them, cutting off supplies until the defenders collapsed from within. The plan was to encircle, to squeeze, to isolate. Strongholds would wither, starved of the lifeblood they needed to fight on. This strategy was built on a truth too often forgotten. Wars are won not simply by inflicting casualties, but by destroying what the enemy cannot replace. Misreading this, wasting effort on the wrong targets, or relying on endless attrition, can doom an entire campaign. The stakes here were absolute. A single miscalculation could cost lives, resources, or the war itself. The importance of logistics has been demonstrated time and again. During World War II, for example, the Battle of Stalingrad was ultimately decided not just by combat, but by the encirclement and starvation of the German Sixth Army. In the Pacific, Japanese forces on isolated islands were rendered helpless once their supply lines were severed by Allied submarines and aircraft. Even in the ancient world, Hannibal's legendary campaign across the Alps was eventually doomed by overstretched logistics, not by a lack of tactical brilliance. But how do you actually strangle an army, especially one that knows you are coming and is digging in to defend its lifeline? The answer lay not in brute force, but in a carefully orchestrated sequence of moves, each designed to outmaneuver, outwit, and ultimately suffocate the enemy's ability to resist. The opening salvo of modern war is not fired from a gun. It is fought for control of information. In this era, the true contest begins long before tanks roll or missiles fly. Whoever holds the most accurate map, the sharpest picture, seizes the initiative and dictates the tempo. The Russians understood this perfectly. Before a single battalion moved toward Donbas, they unleashed a sweeping campaign for information supremacy, determined to blind and outmaneuver their adversary. Their approach was methodical and multi-layered. High above the earth, satellites circled ceaselessly, wielding optical and radar eyes that pierced clouds and darkness alike. Every night, every hour, they recorded the tiniest shifts: fresh trenches, camouflaged artillery, a convoy hidden under tree cover. No change escaped their attention. These digital sentinels assembled the first, most comprehensive map of the enemy's defensive web. Next came the aerial intelligence. Reconnaissance planes, some piloted and some unmanned, swept across the sky in carefully plotted arcs. Streaming live video and radar data, they exposed not just troop positions, but every flutter of anti-aircraft radar, every engine warming up on distant airfields. With each pass, they mapped safe corridors and revealed the enemy's intentions before plans could unfold. But the true revolution hovered lower. Fleets of tactical drones. Swarms of small, nearly invisible unmanned vehicles hovered day and night. They streamed real-time footage straight to command centers, erasing the fog of war. Russian commanders watched as Ukrainian units rotated, tracked the routes of fuel convoys, and pinpointed artillery emplacements before a single shell was fired. No supply run or hidden bunker lasted long. Every threat was marked, catalogued, and relayed to waiting guns. Yet the digital eyes were not alone. Human intelligence filled the gaps where silicon could not reach. Agents and special forces slipped behind enemy lines, gathering priceless whispers: morale cracks, fuel shortages, feuds among officers. They mapped the fractures in the enemy's will, isolating the pressure points where a single blow might cause a cascade of collapse. These human insights added depth to the cold logic of sensors and satellites. The result was a living map, more detailed and current than even the enemy's own charts. Russian command knew not just where the defenders stood, but how they thought, how they felt, where they feared the next strike would land. Their own movements, meanwhile, remained shrouded. In this shadow game, knowledge was the weapon more decisive than any missile barrage. With information dominance, every decision became a calculated certainty. Each strike targeted the exact spot to cripple the enemy's resistance. Lose this contest, and every move is a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice with ruin only a step away. Win it, and victory is not just possible, but inevitable. The stakes are total. Whoever masters the information, war shapes the outcome of the entire campaign. This pursuit of information supremacy is not unique to this conflict. During the First Gulf War, coalition forces relied on a combination of satellite intelligence, electronic eavesdropping, and stealth reconnaissance to shatter Iraqi defenses before the ground war even began. In the Second World War, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted and deciphered German Enigma messages, giving Allied commanders a priceless window into enemy intentions. Time and again, it is the side that sees first and strikes first that wins. With the map drawn and the targets exposed, it was time to turn knowledge into action and strike at the enemy's critical lifelines. When the hammer falls, it does so with chilling precision. Air, artillery, armor, and intellect, each thread woven into a single, relentless assault. This is not chaos, but a symphony of modern warfare, orchestrated to leave nothing to chance. The operation began in the darkest hours before dawn. Russian air forces swept in first, establishing absolute dominance. Enemy air defenses were not simply attacked, they were excised, each radar site and missile battery methodically traced, struck, and silenced. By sunrise, not a single hostile aircraft dared rise. The sky itself now belonged to the invaders. Electronic warfare teams unleashed their arsenal next. Powerful jamming blinded enemy sensors, severed communications, and sowed confusion. Precision-guided munitions, acting on flawless intelligence, struck command posts, supply depots, and armored columns. In moments, defenders were left deaf, blind, and paralyzed, cut off from orders, ammunition, and hope. The importance of electronic warfare has only grown in recent decades. In the Russo-Georgian War of 2008, Russian electronic warfare units disrupted Georgian command and control networks, contributing to a rapid collapse of resistance. During the opening days of the 21st century conflicts in the Middle East, coalition aircraft systematically targeted enemy radar and communications, rendering ground forces vulnerable and isolated. The lesson is clear. Cut the cords, and the puppet can no longer dance. Then came the barrage. Artillery batteries, massed in numbers rarely seen since the Second World War, opened fire with relentless intensity. For hours, the ground shuddered as waves of shells ripped through defensive trenches, ammunition dumps, and every logistics hub that kept resistance alive. No place was safe. No supply route remained untouched. With enemy formations reeling, armored spearheads surged forward. Russian tanks and infantry fighting vehicles bypassed the strongest fortifications, isolating them and leaving garrisons stranded. Airborne troops descended far behind the front, intercepting convoys and seizing crossroads before defenders could regroup. The pace was unyielding. The heart of the operation was its choreography, a coordinated advance from north and south. Like jaws closing, two armored pincers swept inward, racing to sever the critical highway that was the enemy's only lifeline. Drone feeds and traffic cameras captured scenes of abandoned vehicles, their crews fleeing as the noose drew tighter. Attempts at counterattack were desperate, but doomed. Enemy reserves, thrown into the breach, were shattered by unremitting airstrikes and long-range artillery. Within 48 hours, the trap, what Russian planners called the cauldron, snapped shut. Every path west was severed. Escape was no longer possible. Hope bled away with every passing minute. Yet the true danger always lurked beneath the surface. A single lapse in timing or coordination, a missed signal, a stalled column, could have turned triumph into disaster, stalling the advance and transforming the operation into a costly stalemate. Commanders had to trust not just in firepower, but in real-time intelligence, relentless discipline, and the ruthless denial of any chance for the enemy to regroup. Historical parallels abound. In the Second World War, the German blitzkrieg across France in 1940 was characterized by rapid armored thrusts designed to cut supply routes and encircle entire armies. At Falaise, the Allied encirclement of German forces in 1944 led to the destruction of much of Army Group B. In Korea, the Chinese offensives of 1951 leveraged deep penetrations to cut off United Nations forces, forcing desperate retreats. Each time, the side that could close the ring swiftly and ruthlessly reaped decisive rewards. In the end, it was not brute force that decided the battle, but the orchestration of all domains, air, land, and psychological. Ruthless efficiency, flawless timing, and the merciless targeting of critical nodes left defenders, once confident behind reinforced lines, utterly isolated and hopelessly encircled. But to truly understand why the operation succeeded, we must look deeper, not just at what was destroyed, but at which targets were chosen, and why. The anatomy of victory lies in the art of paralyzing the enemy's will and ability to fight. Victory here was forged not through blood and thunder, but through silence and surrender. The final phase of Anaconda did not depend on overwhelming force. Instead, it applied relentless, calculated pressure meant to break the enemy's will long before their bodies gave way. Inside the tightening ring, every movement was watched and punished. Artillery and drones hunted trucks, supply teams, even solitary figures, severing hope of relief or escape. Special forces became shadows in the night, striking at command centers, removing key officers, and scattering confusion among the ranks. Each targeted blow shattered the chain of command, leaving soldiers leaderless, isolated, and adrift. Orders fell silent. Uncertainty spread like wildfire. Yet the most decisive strikes came not from steel, but from sound. Psychological warfare swept the battlefield. Loudspeakers echoed through the darkness, radios crackled with surrender instructions, and leaflets drifted from the sky, promising safety to those who laid down arms. Dedicated radio channels broke through the static, offering clear steps to give up weapons. Each message was honed to sow doubt and fear, making resistance feel futile and surrender inevitable. Day after day, food and ammunition dwindled to nothing. Isolated units waited for help that would never come. Fatigue and fear gnawed away at discipline, eroding resolve 1 hour at a time. The outcome became certain: mass surrenders, as entire companies emerged from bunkers and trenches with arms raised, desperate for the nightmare to end. Direct combat was minimal. Lives on both sides were spared. But the strategic impact was enormous. The operation became a modern case study. Victory achieved not by brute force, but by tightening an invisible net, exploiting every weakness, and turning hope to despair. Intelligence, logistics, and psychology proved to be the war's true decisive weapons. The use of psychological warfare has deep roots. In the Second World War, the Allies dropped millions of leaflets over enemy lines, urging surrender and spreading rumors of overwhelming force. During the Vietnam conflict, the United States military deployed loudspeakers to broadcast messages and even unsettling sounds to sap enemy morale. In the siege of Sarajevo during the 1990s, both sides used radio broadcasts to spread fear and confusion. Today, with modern media and social networks, such campaigns can be far more sophisticated and far-reaching. To ignore these factors, to rely solely on firepower, would have meant a drawn-out, bloody struggle with uncertain results. Instead, a coordinated, networked approach delivered swift, decisive victory, rewriting the rules of conflict in the 21st century. With the Donbas front collapsed and the enemy's backbone broken, the broader implications of Anaconda's success became clear. This new model of victory demanded a fundamental re-evaluation of how wars are fought and how they are won. The next time you glance at a map of war, do not just trace the lines of advancing armies. Instead, search for the arteries, the hidden roots and lifelines beneath the chaos. Victory now belongs to those who see the battlefield as a living network, not a chessboard of brute force. Modern commanders hunt for the one vital flow that sustains the enemy, the single thread that, if severed, can unravel months of resistance in mere days. In Donbas, what many dismissed as just another highway became the pulse of the entire defense. When it was cut, the collapse came swiftly and irreversibly. This is the new logic of conflict. Intelligence gathered from satellites, drones, intercepted signals, and digital footprints reveals weaknesses that no human eye can see. The outcome is no longer shaped by who has more tanks or troops, but by who can strike with precision at the most vulnerable node. The Anaconda operation was not a bloody siege, but a test of information, patience, and psychological leverage. Gone are the eras when victory was measured by the sheer weight of numbers or the courage of massed charges. Today's most effective strategists seek the one point whose failure brings the entire system crashing down. They use every tool, surveillance, disruption, rapid coordination, to force their adversary to fight blind, cut off, and desperate. Let's make this concrete. Imagine a scenario in which you are a commander tasked with defending a city. You have 10,000 troops, hundreds of vehicles, and formidable fortifications. But your entire supply of food, water, medical supplies, and ammunition flows down a single road. The enemy knows this. Despite your best defenses, your fate is now tied to the survival of that thin thread of asphalt. If it is cut, your men will run out of bullets in 3 days, water in 5, and morale in less than a week. Or consider a business in the modern world. You may have the best product and the most talented employees, but if your company relies on a single supplier for a key component, you are vulnerable. A strike, a natural disaster, or a competitor's sabotage can bring your operations to a standstill overnight. In warfare, just as in business and life, it is the hidden dependencies, the single points of failure, that determine outcomes. Practical steps for commanders and planners in this new era are clear. First, map every dependency, logistical, informational, psychological. Identify not just the obvious strong points, but the overlooked arteries, the single bridges, the lone communications towers. Second, prioritize intelligence gathering above all else. Invest in drones, satellites, signals interception, and human assets. Third, achieve information dominance before moving a single battalion. Fourth, coordinate every move across domains, air, land, cyber, psychological, for maximum effect. Fifth, always ask, what is the enemy's most irreplaceable asset? How can I sever it? Ignore this shift, and you risk not just misunderstanding this war, but misreading every conflict of our time. Clinging to outdated models costs lives, squanders resources, and can imperil national security itself. The margin between triumph and catastrophe often lies in your grasp of networks, not your count of divisions. So, when headlines show shattered front lines or sudden retreats, ask, what artery was just severed? Whose will just snapped? Where is the real center of gravity? Because in modern warfare, the winner is not the one who strikes hardest, but the one who thinks sharper and moves first. The story of the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka highway is not merely a tale of tanks and trenches. It is a lesson for every strategist, leader, and observer. It shows that in the age of networks, the most powerful weapon may be the simplest, the most decisive victory, the one achieved with the least blood. The art of war in the 21st century is the art of identifying the single thread whose severing brings the whole web down.